I'm speaking in good faith with Cantor Sharon Brown Levy from congregation Kol Ami in Salt Lake City. She's certified in cantorial arts from both the Reform Movement's American Conference of Cantors and the Conservative Movement's Cantors Assembly. And prior to her arrival here in Utah, she served pulpits in Toronto, Wisconsin, New Jersey, and Florida. She's a respected choral conductor, co-leading one of the country's largest community interfaith choirs, Voices in Harmony. Cantor Brown-Levy, you've been a previous guest as well, so this is like having an old friend come back. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. I'm honored to be here.
And I wonder if you might just so briefly mention what a cantor does throughout the year, and then we could talk specifically about Passover.
Sure. Well, a full-time cantor is really the co-spiritual leader in many ways, along with the rabbi, who is usually considered the primary worship leader or spiritual leader of a community. But cantors and rabbis are both equally trained in the world of what Christians would call the Old Testament or the Hebrew Bible. We are also trained in various life cycle events, from birth to bar and bat mitzvah, confirmation, weddings, baby namings, and funerals. So every facet of life, we are fully trained and able to officiate, co-officiate, whatever capacity is needed. We visit the ill. In addition to a tremendous amount of educational training, the actual degree from the seminary is entitled a Master's of Sacred Music. So it's beyond a bachelor's degree, but it also includes many of the very same aspects that a rabbi is trained for. And so it is no longer just investiture, it's actually called ordination. So these are very rigorous courses. It's a 5-year post undergraduate program or the equivalent. And I've been very fortunate to have completed the equivalent of 2 postgraduate programs, one in the Reform movement and one in the Conservative movement. But as far as activities, what we do, what does a typical week look like? We are regularly interfacing with people of all ages. It involves a whole lot of education in the Hebrew and religious school. Cantors are usually the primary source of bar and bat mitzvah, or the plurals b'nai mitzvah, training. We prepare confirmation students also in their lectionary, in their portions that they study, as well as making commentaries on our various sacred texts. And we are frequently visiting people during the week for pastoral reasons. We meet with a full staff on a regular basis to make sure all of the programming, not just for worship, but for various other programs such as social action and extended community work. This community is a really unique one where the clergy and the staff get to interact regularly with the outside community, whether it's on a sacred level or on a secular level. So
thank you. Well, when it comes time for Passover, I'm wondering what musically happens in the synagogue, and then what part of that happens in people's homes with their Seder.
Thank you. Those are great questions. So the holiday of Passover outside the land of Israel is observed by most diaspora Jews for 8 days, unless you're of the Reform movement. The Reform movement celebrates it 7 days, as Israel does. But when you're working outside the land of Israel, which we call the diaspora, it is an 8-day commemoration. And the first 2 days and the last days of Passover are what we call the holiest days. And as we approach the actual services that occur in the synagogue, both evening and morning on those dates, at our homes, we create a service that is unlike any other culture in the world. It's called a Seder, which means order. And there's actually an order of events that occurs all over the world in people's homes as they welcome family, friends, guests. Don't have to be strictly Jewish, although it is initiated by a Jewish family. People can come and celebrate no matter what your faith upbringing is, or even if you don't have a faith to which you ascribe. So the first 2 nights are Seder nights, where this very elaborate service, including symbolic foods, very special music, activities. We are actually experientially trying to recreate the Exodus from Egypt and commemorating our freedom from 400 years of slavery. We relive this experience at the Seder and through parts of our religious services as well, which are in addition to the two Seders.
So we will be speaking in addition with Rabbi Evan Moffick, or Moffich, I'll find out when I speak to him, from Chicago, who has written the book, What Every Christian Needs to Know About Passover. And I'm wondering if I can have you add sort of the color commentary, like if we were watching a sports game, you would be the one coming in with, the reason they chose that play is because, and sort of filling us in with the beautiful traditions of. And I'm wondering, are there songs that would be sung in the service that might not be at home and vice versa, or are they interchangeable?
So also a great question. So the answer is like yes and. So the service has its very own unique qualities, certain pieces ascribed specifically to the service, although there are varying melodies depending on where you are in the world, and also varying customs done at the Seder depending on your individual family traditions or your ethnic tradition. There are Jews of varying backgrounds in the world. They're usually categorized into two major ones. There are others, but the two major ones are Ashkenazi, which are Eastern European Jewish traditions. That's the majority of the United States and North American Canadian Jews usually come from Ashkenazi heritage, but there are quite a number of Jews that come from Sephardic heritage, which are originally of Spain and the Middle East area. There are also Mizrahi Jews, they're Ethiopian Jews, all of which, and of course, Jews all over the world, even in small pockets in the Far East, varying other places, even though we're in small numbers, there are varying traditions for Passover, not only Seder, but also what's done in their services, again, depending on their level of observance and the denomination to which they ascribe. So there are certain essential elements of the Seder, which I can highlight in a little bit, and also very important elements of the actual Passover services that are intrinsic to, well, the two most, we'll say the most modern developments of Jewish denomination, which I serve here at Kol Ami, are Reform and Conservative. Many common elements between Reform and Conservative, but we'll say that the word conservative connotes elements that are really from Orthodox and the oldest traditions that we try to conserve or preserve in our services. And one that is common to all of the denominations of Judaism, as well as in parts of our Seder, is called the Psalms of Hallel. And they're done in various levels of, we're going to say, numbers of verses in the Psalms, the kinds of Psalms. Melodies, again, vary from person to person, family to family.
I wonder if you're comfortable singing or sharing a section of that you just described. One of those psalms.
Absolutely. Well, I'm going to give you an introduction to what these are. So the Psalms, we ascribe actually 150 songs to King David and some of his helpers over the years. There are some sages and scholars that say that it's perhaps possible that some of these Psalms may even have been initially formed when we left Egypt. So that would be not in the time of David, but most people ascribe them to David. And, we could say that maybe a variation of them might have been stated as we left Egypt. We're not really sure. So the Psalms that I'm focusing on out of the 150 are the 6 that we call the Egyptian Hallel. And if you've heard of the word hallelujah, right, most people know that. That's a Hebrew word that's been used in multiple language. Hallel means praise. Hallelu is it's a plural form, and then Yah is one of the many ineffable, unpronounceable names of God. So hallelujah means we praise God, or in praise of God. And so all of them start with the word hallelujah. They're recited not only at Passover, but also at the other major biblical festivals of the 5 books of Moses. The holiday of Shavuot, the festival of weeks, the holiday of Sukkot, the festival of booths, which is in the fall, and a post-biblical festival, which is Hanukkah. The Hallel is also recited there. There are shorter versions of Hallel recited at the Passover Seder. Also, the last 6 days of Passover have the abbreviated Hallel. So not all 6 are recited on those days. And at the new Jewish month, which is called Rosh, meaning head or beginning, and Chodesh month, Rosh Chodesh, every month we do an abbreviated Hallel at that season as well. Some Jews will also recite it on the more modern holidays, such as Israel's Independence Day and the Day of Jerusalem. It is not recited at the major Jewish holy days, such as Rosh Hashanah or Yom Kippur. And also we have another big holiday coming up called Purim, where the story of Esther is recited instead of Hallel. So let me sing you an excerpt of Hallel. I'm going to pull up a piece of it. This is both in a Passover Seder, and it is also chanted in the services throughout the week whenever Hallel is recited, whether it's the full or the reduced version. One of the Psalms, it's not the very first one, but it is the most common one that is stated in Seders as well as at the services. So it is called B'tzeit Yisrael. I'd like to give you the translation so everyone kind of gets an idea of what this means. All right, this is Psalm 113. When the people Israel came out of Egypt, the house of Jacob from a foreign nation, Judah became God's holy place. The people Israel became God's dominion. Now we have these wonderful images. I love these images. Seeing them, the sea took flight. The Jordan flowed backward. Mountains pranced like rams, hills like newborn lambs. O sea, why run away? Jordan, why flow backward? Mountains, why prance like rams? Hills, why dance like lambs? Earth, shake before your master's presence. Tremble before the God of Jacob, who turns mountain peaks to pools, flint to fountains. Just absolutely gorgeous imagery of, I mean, you can picture, we live in such a beautiful area here in Utah. Could you imagine if all of this nature reacted as such? So here's how part of this goes. It's a rather long one. I'll just give you a couple of phrases. B'tzeit Yisrael mitzrayim Beit Yaakov me'am lo'ez Hayta Yehuda likodsho Yisrael mamshilotav Hayam Ra'av Ayanos Hayarden Yisov Le'achor Heharim Rakidu Che'elim Givaot Kivnei Tzon. Just the beginning, so you get an idea.
And it's true that I am seeing you and you have a smile on your face, but I think just the melody itself and the rhythm does contain a certain amount of joy.
Absolutely it does. Absolutely it does. 100%.
There is another song that really captured my imagination in some material that you sent that we'll link to in our show notes. It's about a traditional song during the celebration of Passover, meaning it would have been enough for us. Dayenu.
Dayenu. The word day in Hebrew is enough. Enu is for us, is a suffix for us. It would have been enough for us.
And it's lovely to see this recounting of these things, that the many miracles of God for the people. If God would have taken us out of Egypt, it would have been enough for us. If he had not killed, if he had judged their idols, it would have been enough for us. I'm just skipping through. If he would have split the sea for us and not let us go through, it would have been enough for us. So all of these different things were enough, and yet God has done so much. That seems to be what I'm feeling from this. Is that the intent?
Absolutely. You see, the primary purpose of the Seder is to feel as if we personally experience this exodus from Egypt. So we are as we're feeling that we're coming through the Exodus, through the various parts of this beautiful experience, we're also sharing this gratitude. And we're not only reflecting on the Exodus, but all the times throughout our people's history, or at least early history, and there have been many, many, even after Dayenu was written, that we are showing a sense of humility, a sense of gratitude for everything that had happened, whether it's related to the Exodus itself or beyond that point.
Could you share a little of that with us?
Absolutely. So, for example, I mean, it's kind of an outlook on how we lead our lives. Let's take a modern glance at showing some gratitude and how it can relate to the stanzas in this. I'll recite some of the stanzas, of course, from Dayenu, but I want to give a little modern take on this so we could see how it applies to our lives, right? So what do we live in now? An era of capitalism, right? And increasingly in a global sense. In regard to religion, consumption is unfettered by any internal sense of restraint, from whatever soda we can drink to how much money Wall Street executives even make. We live in a world where it is okay that the richest people in the world have total wealth equal to that of the poorest 3.5 billion on the planet, right? Dayenu reminds us that there is another way. Judaism offers this outlook on wealth and consumption and sufficiency that is countercultural. In this beautiful text outside of the Passover book that guides us called the Haggadah, it's one of the many beautiful texts that have been written post-Passover, many, many centuries later, called The Ethics of Our Ancestors, or Pirkei Avot. It says, one of the great teachers, Ben Soma, writes, "Who is rich? The one who is content with what one has." And in some of the greatest commentaries on the Torah, on the books of Moses and beyond, which is called the Talmud, there's an instruction that says an individual who can eat barley bread but eats wheat bread is guilty of transgressing a law of unlawful waste, right? So we don't want to waste unlawfully. We want to take care of what we have, take care of our planet, take care of our possessions. Judaism is certainly not ascetic. We are encouraged at times to carve out occasions for a little excess within reason, right? For enjoying finer parts of living, such as Shabbat, holidays, and other joys. But the wisdom here is that if we want to experience delight on special occasions, we also need moments of restraint. This, to me, is the basis of Dayenu. We are showing restraint, we're showing humility, we're showing gratitude. For it's this juxtaposition of restraint and largesse that creates this life of meaning. I just love this work, love this sacred work. So the beginning of Dayenu says, had God brought us out from Egypt and not executed judgment against the Egyptians, it would have been enough for us, Dayenu. Had God executed judgment against them and not destroyed their idols, Dayenu, enough for us. Had he destroyed their idols and not slain their firstborn, it would have been enough. Obviously, the firstborn being the final straw where Pharaoh relented. Had God slain their firstborn and not given us some of their possessions, Dayenu. And then it just builds on each one of these, given us our possessions and not divided the sea. Had God divided the sea and not brought it through us dry on dry land. Every piece we are grateful for at every level of the story. Do you know that in our morning blessings for regular worship, we're commanded to say 100 blessings for the blessing of the ability that a rooster has just to wake us up in the morning. There's so much gratitude that we have. My students can't believe when I say, you're praying about a rooster in the morning? Well, we're actually praying for the ability to wake up because the rooster has been given the gift of sound to waken us from centuries ago, So it's amazing, and I would say eternal expression of gratitude based on coming from that point. It is because we were freed from Egypt that we can be the people we are today. Had we not been freed from Egypt, we would still be slaves all these years later to Pharaoh or the generations that followed.
I wonder if...
Would you like to hear a little bit sung?
Of course. That's where somehow to me, it's like the words are the little ingots, but when they're put to music, it's like they get put in the fire and they start to glow. They come they come to life. So yes, if you would please bring these to life for us.
Absolutely. So at the beginning, we speak before singing, how many favors has God bestowed upon us? So, Ilu hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, hotzianu mi Mitzrayim, Dayenu. Refrain. Dayenu, 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 Dayenu. Then we skip down a little bit because there are so many. And just to make things a little bit easier, I'm going on to the next page after about, 10 or 11 verses. We say, even if God had just given us the Torah, Ilu natan lanu et Torah, natan lanu et Torah Dayenu. Refrain goes on from there. And one of my favorites is, as we've come through all of these trials and tribulations that God has helped us through, we conclude that set almost with, if God had just brought us to the land of Israel. This is way later in time, but remembering that every step is important to reaching the goal. Ilu hichnisanu le'eretz Yisrael, hichnisanu le'eretz Yisrael, Dayenu. And then it goes on to the refrain, of course.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
One of the biggest, I knew there was a little part for the youngest child somewhere in the Seder,
Yes.
but I didn't know exactly what it was. But there's actually the song, The Four Questions, that ties in with that. Will you talk to me about that song, that event?
Absolutely. So it is said that the youngest child at the Seder who is capable of doing so, right? If it's an infant or someone who can't speak, obviously they're not included in that piece. Or it could be the young. At one time, I happened to be the youngest person at a Seder as a grown adult, and the position was given to me. This is my college years. It was actually a really neat experience where I didn't have family locally, and there was a professor who invited students who needed a place to go and invited other members of the faculty who were of varying traditions of faith. It was really neat. And I got to do what was called the 4 questions. So the number 4 is really significant in the Jewish tradition because, well, it is said in Torah times that God redeemed us 4 different ways. So we recite 4 questions. There are 4 cups of wine or grape juice. And the number 4 is really, numbers are very, very important in our tradition, have many mystical and spiritual meanings. But the 4 questions initially, before that number became famous, were considered to have first been uttered by Moses' youngest child, whose name was Gershon, which means the stranger can dwell with us. It's a beautiful name. And it is said that as the angel of death was passing over the homes that had been spared because the blood of the Paschal Lamb had been placed over the doorposts of the homes to spare the Jewish people, as this horrific night of screaming and shouting and terrible loss was occurring amongst the Egyptians, the Jews living in Goshen, in that section of Egypt, were the only ones spared. And Gershon actually asked these questions. So when the Seder was formed officially many, many years later and was continued to be uttered, iterated by Jews all over the world, they always included Gershon's questions and had decided to assign it to the youngest child. Didn't matter which gender, didn't have to be a boy, at the Seder. So the questions read this. I'm going to read them first in Hebrew and then translate. Now, something you should note is that the common language of the Jewish people for many years was not Hebrew, as it is today in the land of Israel. It was called Lashon HaKodesh, the holy language. So it was reserved only for worship and worship services and synagogues and the temples of Jerusalem, etc., before there were synagogues. So when the Seder occurred, most of the language of the Seder at the time was in the vulgar language, which was Aramaic. And so pieces like this are, yes, Hebrew, but there are numerous other pieces of the Seder that are Aramaic. So the first question stated by the youngest is, Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot shebechol halelot anu ochlim chametz umatzah halayla hazeh kulo matzah, which reads, it's kind of like the question before the question, sort of like 2 in 1. How is this night different from all other nights? The official first question reads, on all other nights, we may eat either leavened or unleavened bread. On this night, only unleavened bread, which we call matzah, right? And it's sung, right? And there are many different ways of singing these 4 questions. I learned a different one when I was a child from the one that I teach my students, the kids of the religious school here. The most common one today that the kids seem to enjoy in my many years of teaching is Ma nishtana halayla hazeh mikol halelot, and repeats mikol halelot, from all of the nights. Shebechol halelot, on all nights. Anu ochlin, we eat. Chametz umatzah, leavened things, or matzah. Halayla hazeh, on this night, Kulo matzah, only matzah. And then it repeats. The second question reads, on all other nights, we may eat any vegetable. On this night, we're required to eat bitter herbs. So as you see, as these questions are coming forth, you're getting kind of a preview of the symbolic foods of the Seder, right? That every food other than the main meal, which occurs way later in the service, every food that sits on the Seder plate has a very special symbolic meaning. It is not there by accident. It's there for a purpose, linking us to the recollection of this Exodus.
Right.
Etc. And I'll just translate the last 2 questions for the sake of time, because I know
Sure.
that our time is important here. The third question reads, on all other nights, we are not bidden to dip our vegetables even once, but on this night, we dip them twice, right? So now that we're eating these special vegetables, we've got to dip them. We're going to dip them the first time. The answer to that is they'll be dipped in salt water to remind us of the tears that the Israelites experienced over hundreds of years of slavery. And then there is a dipping of the bitter herbs with this very special food, which is called haroset. Haroset is a mixture traditionally, but has many recipes, of apples, nuts, and wine, or similar, and again varies from place to place, which symbolizes the mortar. It's actually interesting that the bricks, which were a terribly unpleasant experience to have to make them without straw for so many years, in times of desperation, in times of slavery, that we actually create this food that's sweet to help counteract the bitter herbs that are on our plate, which reflect also, as the salt water does, the bitterness, the sadness of slavery. And finally, the last question, on all other nights, we eat our meals in any manner. On this night, why do we sit around a table together leaning? Why do we lean back? And when I was a child in my Seder, my family set up pillows at every single seat because we're supposed to rejoice in the fact that we can relax and be free, where we always had to be upright and rigid as slaves.
Beautiful imagery, and you can see why over the centuries, by asking and then answering those same questions year by year, family by family, event by event, that these answers are part of everyone who has participated.
Absolutely.
A great way to pass on. I wonder if we do have limited time, but this is so much fun to get to look. to learn from you about
I'm
the
having
pieces.
fun too. Thank you for having me today.
And that you can sort of be our Pesach jukebox a little bit, not to be disrespectful, but the fact that you can share these with us, the music, is really delightful. Is there music tied in with Elijah the prophet?
Oh, yes. So Elijah is a very important piece of, well, not only, our Jewish story, who occurred, by the way, whose lifetime occurred after the Pentateuch, after the 5 books of Moses. The Elijah's existence was, according to our greatest sages and teachers of years ago, his purpose of existence was to help us as a people be a harbinger of messianic times, right? Time of great peace. And so out of our greatest affliction as slaves, we're praying that the world can come to a time of peace. And so there's actually a 5th cup. There are 4 cups that we drink, but there is another cup that is set aside specifically outside from each cup at everyone's place setting that is not touched. It's filled to the brim with sweet wine, and it is actually set for Elijah. There's a part where we mention, this is towards the end of the Seder, that we welcome Elijah into our homes symbolically, and usually someone is designated, doesn't have to be a child, but children love doing this, to actually open the door wide as if Elijah were going to open, which is a symbol of welcoming, right? Like, God willing, Elijah even symbolically would enter our homes. The idea is that we're opening our minds, that the world can come to a better place. And that Elijah reminds us that with all of the strife on earth, there is that possibility. There is that possibility. And Elijah's presence is also welcome at other famous places and ceremonies of Jewish faith, such as the birth of a new baby, usually the baby boy or baby girl naming. We invite the presence of Elijah to bring forth a good life for the child. And every Saturday evening at the close of the Sabbath or Shabbat, Elijah is invited into our homes again to help us bring forth the sweetness of the Sabbath into the rest of the week. So Elijah's presence is really important, not only on a weekly basis, but in establishing renewal. Each time, in a sense, you could see that it's a sense of renewal and hope. And so we sing this beautiful piece that celebrates Elijah, which says, Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu HaTishbi, Elijah the Tishbite, Eliyahu HaGiladi the Giladite, Bimhera v'yaminu, may it come quickly in our days, Yavo Elenu, to come to us, Im Mashiach ben David, the symbolic messianic time coming from the lineage of David, the messianic time coming from the lineage of David. So, Eliyahu, it's always done singing. It's singing and also standing. Standing. It's a sense of respect and reverence. You get up from the table, everyone stands, watches someone open the door, and we focus on the door being open, and the cup is held up to greet Elijah like this. Eliyahu Hanavi, Eliyahu HaTishbi, Eliyahu, Eliyahu, Eliyahu HaGiladi. I could go on, but that's just a taste.
That's lovely.
A musical taste.
A lovely insight. I can see that great care has been taken, that the children, the younger people, are learning. They're asking and answering questions or hearing the answers. I saw a song that totally delighted me that was like, this is supposed to help the kids have fun. And I want to ask about the song about the goat.
Oh, the goat. Okay, so now we come to the concluding pieces, right? So imagine that, depending on everybody's tradition, some people go through every single page of the Seder book, which I'm going to hold up one of the older ones that I grew up with. There are hundreds of new Seder guidebooks, which were called a Haggadah. Haggadah means the telling. So here's the Haggadah that we used to teach. This is the Rabbi Nathan Goldberg version. There are, again, many more modern versions of this, but this is a lot for children to sit through, right? Yeah. There's a lot of material here. So some people may do every single page and pore over it. Some may skip sections and just find the highlights, but the actual elements themselves are not skipped. It's just sometimes that pages within those elements might be synthesized to help to keep the kids' attention. In addition, before we get to the story of a goat, I should say that in the beginning of the Seder, there is a piece where the middle of the three symbolic unleavened pieces, the matzahs, that there are three major ones that symbolize the tribes of Israel. The middle one is broken and then hidden away until the end of the Seder. Why? It doesn't tell you this, but the reason is so that it keeps the kids' attention, because the person who finds the middle matzah at the end of the Seder gets a prize. It's called the afikomen, which means the dessert. So there are all kinds of tricks and tips that are given, to help people engage the children throughout the whole Seder. And the goat piece is no different. It actually keeps the adults interested too, because after you've had 4 cups of whatever grape drink you're going to be having, you're going to probably be a little bit loopy at the end of all of that study and singing and a nice big meal at the very end, you see. So the story of the goat, it kind of reminds me of some of the folklore that we have that builds on one after another. gosh, I'm trying to think of, it's not exactly the same, but if you ever heard of the story of the person who swallowed a fly
Yes.
and then what happened to the person after that, and after that, there was a consequence that occurred
Yes.
after each one. So the story of the goat is written originally in Aramaic, and it's got all of these literal pieces in it, but every single one of them is symbolic. There's not a single thing in this Seder that you could see or say literally that doesn't have a symbolic interpretation. That's the nature of us. We've always got to make an additional meaning out of something else. And so the name of the piece is called Chad Gadya. And Chad this is all Aramaic. As you know, Chad is from the Hebrew Echad, meaning one, and Gadya is a little goat, a little kid, right? And so what is the symbol of the Chad Gadya? It's the Jewish people. And it came from a biblical reference of a scapegoat, or a goat that was sent out into the wilderness, right? So that it could be sent away and carry the sins of the people away from them.
For Yom Kippur?
But sadly, right, exactly right. And so what happens is that throughout history, the Jews have been this Chad Gadya, even though we sing about it and talk about it at Pesach, at Passover. We have over and over again throughout history been persecuted. So what happens to this goat? What happens is, right, we have, let's see, it's the cat that eats the goat, the dog that bites the cat, the stick that beats the dog, the fire that burns the stick, the water that quenches the fire, the ox, here we go, that drinks the water, the butcher that kills the ox, the angel of death who comes for the butcher, but the Holy One of blessing in the final verse is the last one who is able to take care of us all, right? And with each verse, we keep building on the verse before. So
it's a memory trick as well.
Have a wonderful time teaching this. Huh?
A memory trick as well.
It's a great memory trick. It's a great memory trick. So, you know, for the littlest kids, it's hard for them to get the Aramaic, so we teach it in English. For many people who may not have a background in all of this stuff or come from an intensive music Jewish background as I have, may not have all of this necessarily in their knowledge. But most people will do it in English, which is their first comfort language. That's easiest for them. I was raised singing every verse of this in Aramaic in my house, but I came from a bunch of I came from a Hebrew scholarly dad and very Jewishly musically savvy dad who accompanied Cantors from the time he was very young. So even though there were no Cantors at my home Seder, we had Cantors coming in and out of my house on a regular basis. So I got to hear all kinds of really neat stuff. Would you like to hear a little bit of Chad Gadya?
Of course,
So that you all know how it goes. Okay. So most common melody, and again, there are numerous, but the most common Ashkenazi North American melody is Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya, Dezabin Abba Bitre Jesus, Chad Gadya, Chad Gadya. Then the cat comes next. Ve'ata shunra, shunra is the cat. Ve'achla Gadya. So what some people do is they'll actually make the animal sounds in this to hint the kids in the group where they are. You know, Ve'ata shunra, meow, Ve'achla Gadya, Dezabin Abba Bitre Jesus. So what does it say? Dezabin Abba Bitre Jesus. It says, my father bought for 2 zuzim. So like the kid did not just show up at the place, but that daddy went out and bought it for 2 zuzim. So there was actually sort of like a financial sense of the kid didn't just get there, that there was a cost to bringing the kid to the house. And there's a value to every creature that comes to this house. Right. So then we get to the dog, meow, etc. through all the animals and the sequence. It's adorable. It keeps people's attention. But for the adults or the people perhaps with more years experience at the Seder, it's a reminder of the persecutions that were endured in every generation.
Mm. So this particular celebration that involves every member of the family, can involve every person in the congregation. There is the symbolism, there are the questions, the answers, there's the beautiful music that helps, to me, enliven any tradition. When this is all said and done and sung, what do you hold in your mind? What do you hold in your heart from the process of observing the Passover, and how does that leave you how does that leave your connection with God?
It's so very strong. We have to remember that in order to create the Seder, and also to observe the Passover throughout the week, it is so much more, by the way, than just the Seder and the services. It's weeks of preparation, right? I mean, it's studying in the religious school and learning a lot of the symbolism there too, but it's your whole house. I mean, again, not every Jew does this, but at least in my home, in my life, I can tell you from my personal experience, our house gets turned over, meaning the kitchen, which is already a kosher kitchen and has restrictions, dietary restrictions, there's a whole different level of we call kashrut, or the observance of keeping kosher. At Passover, you've got to put all of your other stuff away. You have designated spaces for the meat and dairy and the foods themselves that are separate for Passover, that are different from there. So you're literally doing a ritualized spring cleaning for 2 weeks. You're prepping for days to get ready for people to come into your home to have the Seder. You've got to shop for all of the symbolic foods. And if you can't get them in Utah because they're not all easy to get, you've got to order them in advance. It's a tremendous amount of prep, which involves a lot of energy. And then all of a sudden you're at the Seder and you've got to maintain the energy level throughout. But it's so important to make sure every person at the Seder has a role. So the person who designs it, logistically, through the religious elements of it, then the people who are also designing it through the food elements, right? I mean, there's so many different moving parts to this that it can leave you feeling not only very fulfilled because it's been so long in the preparation and in the execution, but that you just want to sleep for several days. But if you're a cantor or a rabbi or a Jewish professional, you've got to get up early in the morning, because after the first evening, there's a morning service. And in more observant congregation, there's services throughout the day. And then you have the evening second Seder, and then the services the next day. So it's very intense. And then you have the in-between days where there are some services, depending on the community, others can kind of go back and return to their lives. But the intermediate days are not as intense. So I would say that after, all the preparation and getting through the Seder and taking that deep breath after Chad Gadya is the very last piece of the Seder. I would say it's a feeling almost like you get after like a big, holiday meal that any, secular or Christian or people of another faith might observe, like around, Thanksgiving time. It's just a feeling of, let's just sit and relax. Let's just be and process this. It's also a time to socialize. People tend to ask a little bit more questions to, clarify anything they have. It's a beautiful time to share this incredible experience of the Exodus with friends and family and just be, just authentically be yourselves.
Well, as always, a delight to speak with you, Cantor Sharon Brown Levy. Have we left off? Is there something that you could, even from the vast amount of music that is connected in some way with Passover, is there something that is the most beautiful to you?
Wow.
I'm
there's
just
so much.
I'm just throwing
wow.
this at you with no preparation. I'm just curious.
Wow, no preparation at all. I mean, I love every aspect. This is such an incredible holiday. I mean, and for Jews whose observance is minimal, they tend to somehow participate in the Passover to some extent. I'm really enamored of the Hallel Psalms. That's one of my very favorite pieces. But there is a piece that is often not talked about at Passover, another section of our biblical works, which is the Song of Songs. There are excerpts of the Song of Songs that are sung at the Seder, depending on the people's level of Hebraic fluency and proficiency. But I happen to really adore the Song of Songs because it's really, at one point, it was not going to be included in the biblical canon because it originally was considered a very erotic piece. But our great sages turned it into a love of what we'll call a non, what is the word, erotic, right? It's different. I mean, initially, yes,
platonic?
there was the initial context, but it was changed to a more platonic and pure representation of the pure love between God and the people of Israel. And it's just so breathtakingly beautiful, and words of it are used in various other parts of liturgy, used in wedding liturgy. I know even Christian tradition borrows from the Song of Songs. It's considered really one of the most incredible pieces. So I would say between those two, I would say they're tied in my mind for the beauty of that music and what it expresses.
Good. Thank you so much.